Well, good morning, and thank you for joining us. My name's David Eagle from OneSpatial, and this is one of our webinar series entitled Processing the Obscure with FME. We're taking a slightly different tack this time, looking at some of the more intriguing things you can do with an ETL tool like FME here. We'll start off sort of having a quick peek at some of the more traditional approaches. But then focusing on some of the more obscure data processing challenges, certainly that myself and my colleagues have seen over the years. And the intention is to try and tie that back to how those capabilities are relevant to the things that you're doing day to day. So that's the plan. The chat window and discussion capabilities are available in the webinar, so feel free to drop us messages and we'll try and answer any questions you might have. Just a very brief introduction to who we are. OneSpatial, we've been an FME reseller and partner for a good few years now, since 1999. We're a platinum partner. We support all of the FME products, so that's FME desktop, server and cloud, and we've got quite a few FME certified staff and those that aren't certified, actually, people who work in the business and use FME on a fairly regular basis. So we've got a very strong staffing of FME skilled personnel. We've got a dedicated support team that support our FME customers, and we provide a number of different services around the FME product stack. So whether that's consultancy or training, or whether you just want to buy FME and be supported with the technology, we've got something to help you out, hopefully. So do get in touch with us if you've got any requirements around the FME toolset. So I would say that through the early years of use of FME, CAD to GIS has been the main requirement, or the main use of FME. It's been quoted that roughly about 80% of the use of FME over the years has been this traditional CAD to GIS or GIS to CAD. That's starting to slip a little bit, but I'll get into that in a little bit more detail soon. There's a few things that you can do. There's a couple of blog articles and some very interesting articles over on the FME Knowledge Center. If I just link through to the SAFE blog, I'd encourage you to subscribe to the blog if you haven't already. There's a great article here goes into a little bit of the CAD to GIS integration capabilities. But when I first started using FME back in 2000, those of you who can remember back that far, around about the Y2K bug, again something that was going to cause end of days in the IT world. Thankfully it didn't. I was asked for the first time to sort of go over to a machine in the corner of the room, and it had this mystical product on it called FME, and I was asked to go and extract by a water drainage engineer anything that was to do with water from some base mapping data that was at the time data provided by the Ordnance Survey. So it was a requirement to take data out of an old format, now NTF, and extract it and put it into tiled CAD files, so 1 kilometer square files, and that really is traditional use of FME, taking filtering data out of a file format that has got a seamless coverage, tiling it up, turning it, filtering out the content that you need. Very, very standard day-to-day use of FME. The recent years, the capabilities of FME, though, have become much more far-reaching from just that CAD to GIS requirement. And the breadth of format capabilities that have crept into the tool set, and importantly, the platforms that it can work against and the data types that you can deal with mean that you can very quickly get your head down a couple of very interesting rabbit holes when from a data perspective. So just to give you a view of some of those. Some of these are slightly in chronological order, actually. I mean, Raster support came in properly in around about 2007. There's been support for tabular data for a very long time. I believe that the text reader was one of the very first readers that came into the product, and certainly you'll see a little bit of that in a few demos in a little while. 3D capabilities, and more recently much better support for building information models, Lidar data. Lots of organizations publishing open source data, in fact, both Lidar and 3D capabilities. If you go and have a look in some of the 3D warehouses that are available online to download SketchUp and KML models and play around with open source Lidar. Certainly in the UK, DEFRA have published a lot of Lidar data. Slightly more obscure, perhaps, gaming platforms like Minecraft are supported in FME. Less so than cloud and web services, but actually there are some fairly obscure APIs that you can start to play around with in FME that you might not have thought about doing. Business intelligence, dashboarding capabilities, social media, CRM and document management systems, even 3D printing support in recent releases of FME for the STL format. So if you're a maker playing around with a 3D printer in a garage, you can knock out an STL file now with FME to work with your 3D printing technology. So because of that breadth, the return on investment that you can get with FME when you perhaps bought it for one single task originally, you can now deploy it against all sorts of requirements in your organization, and ultimately make the investment that you made work harder for you. When it comes to obscure, some people that I meet in training classes think that actually some of the transformers in FME are a little bit obscure, and certainly what we'd like to try and do is avoid you having challenges with the interface. And that's really what these webinars are about. That's what SAFE's blogs are about, to describe the capabilities of each of the tools. Each tool or component in FME is a transformer that allows you to manipulate and restructure your data. And we want you to get past the challenges of working with a new transformer or a new version of FME, hopefully by coming and meeting us, seeing us on our training and webinar sessions. So do go to our events page. And if you dive over there, you can actually go and filter on the training courses that we've got coming up, or the webinars that we've got in here. So feel free to go and register for those events like you have done today for this one. So on to some of the obscure uses of FME. We occasionally at our World Tour events ask questions of the audience, and the one that I remember the most, the strongest memory really, was asking about what were the more obscure things that people have used FME for, and a gentleman put his hand up and said that they used FME to manage their Esri license server. And when he got into a little bit more detail, effectively what he was suggesting was that they use an FME workspace to parse on a regular interval, a scheduled interval, their Esri FlexiLM license log file to see who is checking in and checking out licenses from their Esri license server throughout the day. And they filtered that information out the log, they logged it into a database, and then they ran some analysis on that on a weekly and monthly basis. The reason they were doing this is because FlexLM, the licensing tool, doesn't really have any capabilities when it comes to identifying what usage you're making of the licenses you've got. And for them, it gave them the ability to identify whether they were going to need to add any additional seats to their license server, or perhaps go the other way and reduce that license count. Effectively, they were just reading and parsing a text file and archiving off the bits of detail that they wanted. I thought it was a pretty obscure use, but actually quite a clever one. What that leads us into talking about really is that FMEs are very good at reading text files, CSVs, when it comes to working with text data, there are lots of very obscure text formats out there. Certainly, a handful of years ago now, SAFE introduced a CAT reader, which is column aligned text. So that's some slightly more obscure, obscurely structured data. Let's go and have a look at an example of what I mean by obscure text data. Well, I'm going to open up an ASCII file. This is a little text document. This is hopefully, if you can see the detail of this, if I zoom in a little bit more. Effectively, what we've got here is wind speed data. And you can see that it's structured in such a way that the starting point here is an X and Y coordinate, and then the first value that I'm highlighting is a wind speed at that position. The second one is 1 kilometer to the east of the position that's highlighted, and 1 kilometer to the east of this one, and 1 kilometer to the east of this one, and so on. So this structured data set effectively, if you were to process it, can give you a map, a grid of wind speeds. Now, obviously, there's not much wind speed here. That's because at the moment this is ocean, and the wind speed was only being measured on land. So if we were to sort of dive down to here, you can see that there are sections where there are positive wind speeds highlighted. So, I mean, how do we go about processing this kind of data? Well, it's trickier, but there are a few options, and there's quite a neat capability in FME to work with this kind of obscurely structured data, that is a capability called variables. Now, effectively, what we've got here is a process that reads in this text data, and in this case, I'm sampling off some content. So I'm going to kick it off reading just a handful of lines from the text file, and just sample off a few of those. And what you can see is I'm exposing some data and effectively building a list. So I split the attribute, the line of data on the semicolon, build each of those features out, and effectively create a list feature that I can explode into hundreds of thousands of records in some cases, in order to find the coordinates. So effectively, I'm searching for the portion of the line that has the coordinates in, and then I can go and associate, by filtering that data off, I can go and associate the X and Y coordinates with each wind speed. I also later on add on the 1 kilometer each time using this expression evaluator. This workspace works because of the order of the data being read in. So I've just pushed that out. I've got a sample of the data, and you can see that because I took a sample, we've got this striped view. So what I'll do is I'll open one that I created earlier, and this is the full data set. As you can see, 900,000 records in one of the data sets. We've got points and we've got grids being created. So each of those points allows us to create a wind speed, and effectively in here we've got a wind speed of 6.3 meters per second at that location. It's an obscurely structured text file, but one that allows us, one that we can read using the variable option. So effectively using the variable setter and the variable retriever there. Another obscure use of Fme, and this is working with raster data. Actually, I had a very, I guess, a weird and wonderful requirement a few years ago. I was filling in a document for a customer, and I needed to get a number of electronic signatures on it. Those signatures, one of them was my own. That was easy to deal with. I got one sent to me from a colleague, and he went on holiday shortly after sending it to me. And when I actually opened the email and had a look at the attachment with it in, I tried attaching it to the document and printing it out, and really it wasn't readable. The signature wasn't usable in the form it was in. It had to be this person's signature that went on the document, and they'd gone away. They were unreachable. So I thought, what are my options? Well, I am not a good Photoshop user. I don't know what I'm doing with Photoshop. However, I know my way around Fme. So I took the signature, and this isn't the signature. So those of you who have ideas of using this signature for nefarious activities, it's not going to get you very far. But there's Bob Smith, and that's after it had been Fme'd. So what I wanted to do is blacken the signature, the pen signature, and also get rid of this background in there. So let's go and have a look at how we did that. So I've got a little workspace called Signature Blackener, and I'll just pop it onto screen now. There we go. So it's not pretty. There's probably a few more transformers in it than needs to be, but it was just built really quickly for a one-off requirement. You can see in here that effectively I read in the signature, so I'm using a Jpeg Reader. I can just run that and show you the data set in the inspector. So that's the raw Jpeg shown in the inspector, and you can see that there are some pixels in here. If I click on one of those pixels, you can see that it's an RGB, a red, green, blue raster. So there are 3 bands to that raster. So how can I go and deal with this? Well, I could, as you can see here, I could use the raster band separator to split it out, and I'm going to filter off the red band. So if I just disable that link, connect an inspector, rerun that, and dive over to the inspector, and there we go, there's the red band filtered out. So if I click on a pixel, now we've just got that red band, and I'm just going to play around with that red band, so effectively grabbing pixels of a certain value. In Fme, one thing that is pretty handy, although it's a bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut sometimes, is the raster cell coercer. I quite like it. It basically turns a raster into a vector. However, you do end up with 1 polygon per pixel. One benefit it can give you is that you can also extract the band values as attributes, and that's what I'm doing here. If we then put a tester in place, we can filter where that band value is less than a certain amount, in this case 150. So if we pop in an inspector and run this as it is, and away we go. And just while that's running, I just see I've got a question. I've been asked what the documentation custom transformer was in that workspace. So let's just dive back to that one. So it's a good question. That's just a little trick that I've deployed a couple of times in the past. So it was in the WinSpeed process. I'll just dive back to that. And you can see it just here. So it is just a random transformer put into a custom transformer and then deleted. Effectively, you right click on a transformer, turn it into a custom transformer, it drops over a new tab, and then you can delete the contents. And I've done that in order to document this workspace, but have that documentation stored on a separate tab. There's a few different things you can do here. Probably slightly better practice these days is actually to go in and create some documentation under the FME workspace parameters. But there's a few options that are open to you when it comes to documentation. So if I dive back to my process, which is finished now, we can go and have a look, and there we go. There's the pixels that are polygons that have been extracted that have that certain value. And if I drape them over the top of the original raster, you can see the result there. Hopefully, if I just show you which ones I've pulled out. So it's a bit of an art to try and work out which one you want. There are probably better ways of doing this. As I say, it was relatively quick and dirty requirement. Then I dissolved the boundary, dissolved the polygons. So I don't want lots and lots of little polygons. I want larger sections. And you'll find that when you do that, you end up with a very jagged edge. So I've put a bufferer in here, 1.5 units positive. Then I've come back 2, and effectively that process has the benefit of sort of smoothing off and cleaning up the boundaries, and then redissolving them together. So the results after you have got to a sort of a point here, I've area calculated to work out which polygons are very small and then thrown away the very small ones. That was just getting rid of a handful of artifacts around the edge. And then the key thing is turn them all black. I had lots of very light grey ones, and put them into the image rasterizer and turn them into a raster image. So if I run this now and go and have a look in the output directory, so if I bring in the process here, have a look in the output. There's my, it's just about to be overwritten again, but we'll let that overwrite. There's my TIFF. So this process goes from JPEG to TIFF, and it's completed, and there's the image, and there's the results over as the TIFF. So that's a little process. I mean, you know, it does a job. It was a bit of fun to have a go with. Importantly, that also highlights that there are some real-world uses of FME where you can manipulate raster images effectively. One that was extremely similar to that was work I did with a chap from a local authority a little while ago. Having a discussion with them in the early setup, they effectively wanted a clean raster backdrop map for their web mapping GIS, and it was a few years ago. At the time, they decided they would like to use OS Street View. That product doesn't exist anymore; it's been withdrawn. It was close to what they wanted, but it wasn't quite what they needed. They decided that they'd use a transformer in FME called the raster cell value replacer, and the way that the imagery was defined, it was quite easy for them to go and effectively remove buildings and clean up, make that data set less busy. Effectively, that was what they were looking to do. So if we go and have a look, once they'd got those images tidied up, and you can see hopefully the before and after there, they could show the raster without the buildings, and you can see here that effectively this is a before and after shot, and it's slightly zoomed in on the right hand side, but you can see that the salmon coloured buildings here have been replaced with this lighter yellow colour. So effectively the process goes and looks for pixels of a certain color and replaces them with a different color. and that was the net result. Importantly for them, they had hundreds of these images to process, and they didn't want to destroy the original, because when they zoomed in at another zoom scale, they wanted to see the standard image with the buildings. So they effectively ran a batch process with FME on the data, created a separate holding of images, and serve those up as an earlier layer in their WebGIS. It was a really neat use of FME, and I was very pleased to have discovered how they were doing that. How about more obscure uses then? So this is an interesting one that I've done myself, and I have heard of other individuals doing very similar things. Effectively finding certain files on your network, or in my case on my home server, looking for movie clips that have been dumped onto my server, onto hard drives around my house. That makes it sound like I've got hundreds of them. Absolutely don't. But the point is that they can get dropped into folders where perhaps you don't want them. I'm mildly a control freak. Colleagues would say more than mildly, but what I was wanting to do is take a look for films, movie clips, MOV file, MP4s, MPGs, AVIs, all of those file types on a particular path, find out where they are and move them to the right place. There's a very neat couple of reader and writers in FME that are quite obscure in themselves, because they do slightly different things to what you might expect, or you might not have even realized they exist. There's a directory and file Pathnames reader. It's very neat. Effectively, it allows you to go and find lots of different files or folders on your network, and it reads the path, not the file. It allows you to go and hunt for formats that FME doesn't support, like, for example, a Word document, or a .bin file, perhaps. And the file copier writer allows you to copy or move the files to the place that you want them to go to. So how would you do this? Well, there is an FME home use license you can go and get. If I dive over to Safe's home use site, if you wanted to do something like this yourself, you can go and apply for a free home use license to go and have a play around with in your own environment for non-commercial use. Go and submit a request and see if you get granted one. There are a few other ways in which you can get free licenses if you're an educational body or a recently graduated student. Just go and have a look on SAFE's website under the grant programs, and you can come up with your own weird and wonderful and obscure ways of using FME in your own environment for fun. So, how does that translate into the commercial world, into your business place? Well, you can use FME to go and find files on your network that perhaps have spatial data in them, perhaps are of a certain type. Maybe you're looking to find the definitive data on your network. Maybe you're not entirely sure whether you've got certain data sets already and you want to go and hunt for them in other project directories that colleagues have got. Maybe your IT manager is quite annoyed that your server is very full, and you might want to go and check to see if you've accidentally duplicated data on the network. So we can go and have a look at a scraping exercise. If I just go and close down a couple of processes, and I'm just going to go and see if I can find a process here. Bear with me. So we want this one. So this is a trawling process. So we're effectively using the directory and file path reader that I mentioned down the bottom here. That's also set up to go and read in the Windows file properties. So things like when the file was last updated, who owns it, and file size, that kind of thing. And it's also using a reader called the generic reader. It's set up to read a handful of formats, so you can see that it can guess from extension, and it's going to read in the data in my folder and derive the bounding box, so effectively generating a bounding box for each of those spatial data sets, assuming it is spatial, and then joining those two together, so joining the Windows metadata onto the actual features, a bounding box of the data. I carry out some rudimentary deduplication to find out, in this case, whether we have got a duplicate file name. Now, if you were going to do this in reality, you'd also want to check things like file size before you went and did anything significant with the data set. And I'm just styling it up. If it's a duplicate, then I'm suggesting or changing the color of it to see what it looks like. So let's just go and run this out to a little file audit file. So I'm writing it out into a little bit of KML. It's rattling through, finding all of the files that we've got in here. So we've got some mapinfo tab files, there's a DWG, Esri shaped files, microstation DGN, there are some mifmid and TIFF files down the bottom, and then there's some subdirectories as well, so that gives us the ability to go and see if there are any duplicates as well. I've just mocked up a little bit of a sort of a mini network setup. And this kind of thing can run for hours, creating this little audit file. There's the audit trail, written it out into a KML file, and I'm just going to open it up in Google Earth because it's quite a nice little interface to allow me to go and see what data I've got. So there we go. So I've got a little bit of data over there and some over there, so the different locations. If I click on one of these, we can see that's a ferry data set. The file is tab file, mapinfo tab. There's the path that it's stored on. It's stored locally in Ordnance Survey British National Grid, and there's a bit of ownership detail and file size information in there. There's some tiled TIFF files up here. If we have a look in the audit, we've got it set up so we can go and have a look at the different types. So if I go and have a look at the mapinfo tab, you can see there's a city parks file there. There's 3 of them. They're all in a Texas coordinate system. If we dive over to Texas and let that zoom in, and I'll go and just turn off some of those layers, and I think I'll turn everything off for a moment. There we go. Turn back on the city parks data set. There it is. And that's the bounding box of it, and there's a bounding box, and they both match each other, so that's a fairly good indication it's probably the same data. And if we go and click on this one, that one is stored in the data directory, and that one is stored in the data and parks directory. Same file name, same extents, it's probably the same file. Perhaps that's now a to-do list for you to go and look at tidying up your network. So we've got a little audit or auditing workspace to go and deal with some of those problems. So from the obscure to the hopefully useful auditing technique. So how about shopping? It's Friday, it's nearly the weekend, time to go and do a bit of shopping. We could probably do a little bit of shopping with FME perhaps. Is a product available to buy? Maybe, maybe not. So maybe there's something out there with your home use license that you want to go and buy, or at least let you know when something is available to buy. Doesn't matter what it is. Could be theatre ticket, gig tickets. Could be something that is on an electrical site and it's currently in pre-order and you just can't be bothered with pre-orders and you'd rather wait for when the thing is actually available to buy because you then are sure of the price. And you might want to send yourself an email when the price drops below a certain threshold. FME can do this kind of thing. You can parse web pages as text. You can use the HTML table reader to go and read content direct from a website. So let's go and have a look at a quick example. So I've got a simple process that's running at the moment on a schedule for me, and it goes and checks a popular website where you can buy anything, and you probably have guessed where it is. So let's go and have a look at the particular Amazon page that I'm interested in. So if we go and have a look at this product, so there's a product. It's in pre-order at the moment. It doesn't exist. You can't buy it quite yet. Probably will be released on October the 1st, but these things shift sometimes. So what I'm going to do is go and use Fme to read that page. So effectively, I've got a text reader. It reads in that that whole page. I test if the page contains the statement pre-order now. If it does contain pre-order now, I send that feature to the terminator and the process stops. I send any other lines to the feature holder, and they all get held here until such time that we can be sure that there are no lines in there that say pre-order now. As soon as we know that there is no pre-order record, these features are allowed to continue, and I get an email sent to me. So if we run this process now, it should fail because we've just seen that page is still in pre-order. Okay, so termination, workspace does nothing more. If I just disable that link here and run the process, and what I'm going to do is just fire up my my email and get that process to run. So I'm just going to stop it terminating effectively, and it'll send me an email through using the emailer transformer, and over here, if I pull it in, there we go. So you can see here that the system is out of pre-order, and we can actually go over to that web page. It sends me the link. Obviously it's not, I've just forced it to tell me that it is. So I've got that running on a schedule. As soon as that product is out of pre-order, that just runs every day. Then we can find out when to go and purchase the product. You can, as you can see, you can email yourself. You can do more elaborate things if you wish. You could send yourself an SMS. If you've not got a smartphone, you just got a feature phone, you want to send yourself a message so that you can get to a rather retro internet cafe quick to buy that thing. There's a few APIs out there like Twilio that you can have a go with to send even voicemails if you wish. Definitely worth going and have a look at those examples. Real world use of Fme then, it's this kind of if this then do that kind of capability, and you can use Fme servers, directory watch or FTP watch or Dropbox watch protocols to spot the arrival of certain file types in a particular folder. Maybe your manager is putting files in a directory and they just want that file translating into something that they can use. Maybe a colleague is filling in a spreadsheet that you need to automatically parse in order to push data into a business intelligence dashboard like Cabana or Tableau or Microsoft's Power BI. Automatically filling those dashboards with content from files that arrive in a particular location. Or perhaps you want to automatically poll an API, something like marine traffic, a project we've worked on a little while ago, grabbing the locations of vessels, loading an ArcGIS online map. Process runs every 2 minutes. AGOL is updated every 2 minutes, and vessels move around the map automatically thanks to Fme. So if something happens, trigger a process, trigger Fme to do something. Maybe a record turns up in a database, and a trigger in Oracle runs another process, runs an Fme process to go and do something with that record. So we're drawing to a close. I wanted to just finish off with sort of the fun item at the end of the news. The and finally. Try a bit of art with Fme. It's good fun. I mean, I was sort of verging on art with Fme when I was looking at the signature creation and signature editing. But go and have a look at the Knowledge Center. There's quite a fun little article around creating loopy art. If I just dive over there, you can see that here's the article. You can download the little zip file with a workspace in it to have a play around with it. What does it do? Well, if nothing else, it teaches you how to use and how to create looping transformers. If I just pull up the workspace here, you can see a little bit of what it does. There's a couple of custom transformers in there. If I run it, there are published parameters to allow you to create a certain number of squares, for example, and it just pushes the images out into the inspector. You can see if I zoom in, it's sort of an endless little trippy view of these squares. We can keep zooming in for quite a long time till we get right to the bottom. It's looking at offsetting and rotating and repositioning the same feature. And every now and again there is a requirement to do something very similar to this in a process that you're building. It's very neat to know how to work with looping, so I'd encourage you to go and have a look. When it comes to artwork, though, there are a few individuals out in the ether that are doing some pretty incredible things with Fme and products of that they enjoy using in addition to Fme. So I'd encourage you to go and have a look at a couple of blogs, a couple of individuals. Owen Powell is an individual who he's got a fine art background. Do go and have a look at his blog. It's pretty amazing, really. I'm particularly fond of his Fme trees. He's got a workspace that will create a unique tree every time, and you can see these little animated GIFs here are good fun. Owen's a particular fan of Blender, and he does some amazing things with Fme and Blender. So I'd encourage you to go and have a look at his blog. And the other individual that I've been following recently is Topi Chukhanov. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He's a Finnish Fme user who does some incredible visualizations with Fme. Again, encourage you to go and have a look. There's his Twitter. If we just dive over, you can see that he's done a few of these types of visualizations where you can see effectively routing, optimal routing around particular locations. So really amazing capabilities, more obscure than perhaps you might have realized, but they're parsing things like Topi's parsing GPS track logs and using routing engines to do this kind of thing. So really, really neat capability. So big shout out to those guys. I'm getting to the end of my time. We're drawing to a close. Feel free to drop any more questions into the chat log, and we'll try and answer them before we break off here. But thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. Hopefully, what we've done is fuel your imagination with some of the capabilities that you can do with Fme that perhaps are a little bit obscure, but perhaps do have the ability to whet your appetite for some of the things that you might need to do in your organizations with Fme as well. And aside from that, do come and have a look at our website, safe.com for Safe's website, OneSpatial for ours, so onespatial.com/Fme is where our Fme pages are. If you're not familiar with it, go to the Knowledge Center. It's the place to be when it comes to collaborating with other like-minded Fme individuals. You can find the blog and links to YouTube. We've got our own YouTube channel, One Spatial Group, There is an FME playlist on there. Ultimately, our webinars end up, the recordings end up there. So go and have a look over there at some of the webinars that you might have missed. And of course, we're on Twitter. Everyone's on Twitter, so come and join us and interact with us over there. If you want to learn a little bit more about some of the things that we've explained to you today, we'd love to meet you. Please come along to some of our training or some of our other webinars. Just go over to onespatial.com/events and you can register for those sessions there. But for now, I'm going to thank you very much for attending. Hope it's been useful, and see you at the next one. Thanks a lot.